The dusty streets of Walla Walla, Washington stretched before Diana Vaughn like a canvas of impossible need, and she knew before the sun even reached its peak that today would bring more people to her door than she could possibly help, yet somehow she would try anyway. It was May of 1882, and the spring wheat was already showing green in the fields surrounding the small settlement that had grown from a Hudson's Bay Company fort into a proper town of nearly 3,000 souls. Diana stood on the porch of her modest whitewashed house on 3rd Street, watching a family with hollow eyes and threadbare clothes make their way toward her. She recognized them as the Petersons, homesteaders whose claim had been flooded when the Walla Walla River overflowed its banks last month. Before they could even ask, she was already mentally cataloging what she could spare from her pantry. Miss Vaughn, Mrs. Peterson began, her voice cracking with shame and desperation. I know we already came by twice this week, but the children have not eaten since yesterday morning, and I just thought, come inside, Diana said immediately, holding the door wide. I have fresh bread from this morning and some preserves. There is cold chicken left from supper, and I can wrap it for you to take. The gratitude in Mrs. Peterson's eyes made Diana's chest tighten. This was the 4th family this week, and her own supplies were running dangerously low. Her modest inheritance from her parents, who had died of fever 3 years ago when she was 20 years old, had seemed like enough to sustain her comfortably while she worked as a seamstress, but she had not accounted for the constant stream of desperate people who found their way to her door, drawn by word of mouth that spread through the valley like wildfire. Diana Vaughn could not say no. Diana Vaughn would help anyone who asked. As she packed food into a basket, her hands trembled slightly. She had $17 left to her name, and rent was due in 2 weeks. But the Peterson children watched her with such hope in their eyes that she added an extra jar of peaches to the basket, the last one in her cellar. After the Petersons left, she sat at her kitchen table and stared at the nearly empty shelves. She would need to find more seamstress work, though she was already sewing until midnight most evenings. The problem was that half the people who commissioned work from her were as poor as she was becoming, and she ended up charging them so little that it barely covered the cost of thread and fabric. A knock at the door made her rise wearily. It was not even noon yet. The man on her porch was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the Columbia River in summer, a deep blue-green that seemed to see right through her. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair that fell almost to his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowman: canvas pants, a worn cotton shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles. But something about the way he carried himself spoke of capability and quiet confidence. "Miss Vaughn?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that reminded her of distant thunder over the blue mountains. "Yes." Diana found herself suddenly aware of her faded calico dress and the wisps of dark blonde hair that had escaped her bun. "My name is Zachary Oakes. I am the foreman at the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles south of town. My boss, Mr. Henderson, sent me to ask if you might be willing to do some mending for the ranch hands. We have about 15 men, and most of them could not sew a button if their lives depended on it. Mr. Henderson said you are the finest seamstress in the territory and the most reliable person he has ever met." Diana blinked in surprise. The Double Bar Ranch was one of the largest cattle operations in the Walla Walla Valley, running several thousand head of cattle across vast grazing lands. This was exactly the kind of work she needed. "I would be happy to take on that work, Mr. Oakes. When would you need the items?" "Well, that is the thing," Zachary said, and she noticed a hint of uncertainty cross his otherwise stoic features. "There is quite a lot. Would you be willing to come out to the ranch to assess it? I could bring you out tomorrow morning and have you back by evening. Mr. Henderson would pay you for your time, even just for looking." Diana hesitated. It was not exactly proper for an unmarried woman to go alone with a strange man to a ranch full of other men, but proper did not pay the rent, and she needed this work desperately. "Tomorrow morning would be fine," she said. "What time?" I will be here at 7 if that suits you. I will bring the buckboard so you will be comfortable. After he left, Diana allowed herself a moment of relief. Perhaps this was the answer she had been praying for. If she could secure regular work from the Double Bar Ranch, she might be able to continue helping the people who needed her without starving herself in the process. That evening, old Mr. Chen from the Chinese community near the mill knocked on her door. His grandson was sick, and he needed money for the doctor. Diana gave him $8, more than half of what she had left. She lay awake that night, stomach growling because she had given away the last of the chicken and had only eaten a piece of bread for supper, and wondered if she was a fool. But then she thought of Mr. Chen's grandson, a bright boy of 6 who loved to draw pictures in the dirt, and she knew she would make the same choice again. Zachary Oakes arrived promptly at 7, as promised. The buckboard was clean, and he helped her up with a gentle courtesy that surprised her. As they rolled out of town, heading south along the road that wound through golden hills spotted with green, he was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Henderson says you helped his sister last winter," Zachary finally said, "when her husband died and left her with nothing. He said you gave her food and money and helped her find work at the hotel." "Mrs. Carter needed help," Diana said simply. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Zachary said, his eyes on the road ahead. "Most people would not. Most people would offer sympathy and maybe a casserole, then go back to their own lives. You gave her enough money to keep her boarding house room for 2 months and sat with her children while she worked." Diana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You seem to know quite a lot about me, Mr. Oakes." "Zachary," he said. "And yes, I asked around. Mr. Henderson does not hire people without knowing their character, but I wanted to know for myself." "And what did you learn?" Diana asked, not sure if she should be offended or flattered. "That you are either the kindest person in Walla Walla or the worst businesswoman in the territory. Maybe both." There was no mockery in his voice, only a sort of puzzled respect. "The man at the general store says you buy supplies on credit and then give them away to people who need them more than you do. Your landlord says you are 3 weeks behind on rent, and half the families in town say you saved them from starvation or worse." Diana felt her defenses rise. "I fail to see how my financial situation is relevant to mending shirts, Mr. Oakes." "Zachary," he corrected again. "And it is relevant because Mr. Henderson wants to help you, and so do I. But we need to understand the situation first." They drove in silence for a while, the buckboard creaking rhythmically and the morning sun warming Diana's shoulders. Finally, she spoke. "I do not need charity, if that is what you are suggesting." "No," Zachary agreed. "You need work, and you need people to stop taking advantage of your good heart. Those are different things." Diana wanted to argue, but she could not. She was exhausted, hungry, and frightened about her future in a way she had not allowed herself to admit before. Something about this quiet cowboy made her feel like she could be honest. "I do not know how to turn people away," she said softly. "They come to my door with such need in their eyes, and I remember when my parents died. I was terrified and alone, and the few people who helped me made all the difference. I want to be that person for others. But you are right. I am a terrible businesswoman. I charge too little, give away too much, and now I am nearly destitute myself." Zachary nodded slowly. "That is what I thought. Well, Miss Vaughn, here is what is going to happen. The Double Bar Ranch has real work for you, and we pay fair wages. But more than that, we are going to make sure you have enough surplus to keep helping people the way you want to. You should not have to choose between being kind and surviving." "I do not understand," Diana said. "You will," Zachary replied, and there was something in his smile that made her heart skip in an entirely unexpected way. The Double Bar Ranch sprawled across a valley between rolling hills, with a main house built of timber and stone, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Zachary helped Diana down from the buckboard with strong, calloused hands that were surprisingly gentle. Mr. Henderson was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a forthright manner. He greeted Diana warmly and led her into a room off the barn that was piled high with mending. There were torn shirts, pants with blown out knees, socks with holes, and even a few jackets that needed buttons or patching. It was easily 2 weeks of full-time work, maybe more. I know it looks like a lot, Mr. Henderson said, but we have been collecting it for months, waiting for the right person. I will pay you $50 for the lot, plus another $50 bonus if you can finish it within a month. And if the quality is as good as I expect, I will want to hire you on permanent like for regular mending. Say $10 a month retainer, plus piecework rates for bigger jobs. Diana's head spun. $100 plus a regular retainer. It was more money than she had seen in months. It was enough to catch up her rent, restock her pantry, pay off her debts at the general store, and still have enough left over to help others without destroying herself in the process. That is extremely generous, Mr. Henderson, she said carefully. Are you certain that is a fair rate? It seems quite high for mending work. Mr. Henderson exchanged a glance with Zachary. Miss Vaughn, my sister told me you charged her 25 cents to mend 3 dresses and alter 2 of her children's outfits. That work was worth at least $3, probably more. You are good at your craft, and you deserve to be paid properly for it. Besides, my men need to look respectable, and their clothes last longer when they are properly mended. It saves me money in the long run. Diana felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I accept. When would you like me to start? Take what you can carry today, Mr. Henderson said. Zachary will bring you out twice a week to exchange finished work for new items. That way you are not overwhelmed, and we get a steady stream of mended clothes. Does that suit? It suited perfectly. Zachary loaded several bundles into the buckboard while Diana discussed specifics with Mr. Henderson. By the time they started back toward town, it was early afternoon, and Diana felt lighter than she had in months. Thank you, she said to Zachary as they drove. I do not know what you said to Mr. Henderson, but I suspect you had something to do with this opportunity. I might have mentioned that the bunkhouse was looking shabby and the men were complaining about their clothes, Zachary said, but Mr. Henderson has been wanting to help you since you took care of his sister. He is a good man. And you? Diana asked. What kind of man are you, Zachary Oakes? He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his blue-green eyes made her breath catch. The kind who thinks a woman who gives everything to help others deserves someone to look after her for a change. The kind who has been thinking about you since I first heard about you 6 months ago. The kind who just convinced his boss to create a job so that you would have reason to visit the ranch regularly because I wanted an excuse to see you without seeming forward. Diana's heart hammered in her chest. That is very forward. Mr. Oakes. Zachary, he said again. And yes, I suppose it is. But I am 30 years old, Miss Vaughn, and I have learned not to waste time dancing around the truth. I find you fascinating and beautiful, and I would like permission to court you properly if you would allow it. No man had ever spoken to Diana so directly. She had been too busy caring for her dying parents and then trying to survive and help others to think much about romance. But sitting beside this quiet, capable cowboy who had just helped secure her financial stability, specifically so she could continue being kind, she found herself wanting to say yes with an intensity that surprised her. I think I would like that, Zachary, she said softly. Though I should warn you, I come with complications. People will continue to come to my door needing help, and I will continue to help them. I know, Zachary said. That is one of the things I admire about you. But from now on, you are not doing it alone. If people need food, we can provide supplies from the ranch. If they need work, I can find jobs that need doing. If they need money, we will figure it out together. You have been carrying this whole town on your shoulders, Diana. Let me help carry the load. The way he said her name, with such gentle respect, made her feel things she had never experienced before. By the time they reached her house, She was smiling despite herself. Over the next 3 weeks, a pattern developed. Zachary brought her to the ranch every Tuesday and Friday. She would deliver finished mending and pick up new items, have lunch with Mr. Henderson and his wife, and then Zachary would drive her back to town. During the drives, they talked. Zachary told her about growing up on a small ranch in eastern Oregon, about losing his family to scarlet fever when he was 19, about working his way across the West, learning the cattle business until Mr. Henderson hired him as foreman 5 years ago. Diana told him about her childhood in Walla Walla, about her parents' general store, and how she had learned to sew from her mother, about the devastating fever that had taken them both within a week of each other. They discovered they both loved poetry. Though neither had much formal schooling, they both preferred coffee to tea, sunrise to sunset, and believed in judging people by their actions rather than their circumstances. Zachary made her laugh with dry observations about the ranch hands and their various mishaps. Diana impressed him with her ability to repair clothing so skillfully that the men's were nearly invisible. But it was more than compatibility. There was a pull between them, a magnetic awareness that made every accidental touch feel significant. When Zachary helped her up into the buckboard, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary, Diana felt heat flood through her. When she reached across him to point out a hawk circling overhead and her shoulder brushed his arm, she felt him tense in a way that had nothing to do with discomfort. The money from the mending work transformed Diana's life. She paid her rent in full and 3 months in advance, restocked her pantry, settled her debts, and still had money left over. When Mrs. Peterson came by again, Diana was able to give her food without anxiety. When Mr. Chen's grandson needed medicine, she could help without bankrupting herself. Word continued to spread, and more people came, but now Diana had resources to offer beyond her own diminishing supplies. One Friday in early June, as Zachary drove her back from the ranch, dark clouds gathered over the Blue Mountains. They were still 5 miles from town when the sky opened up, releasing a torrent of rain that turned the road into a river of mud within minutes. The buckboard bogged down, wheels sinking deep. Zachary jumped down to assess the situation, his clothes soaking through immediately. "We are stuck," he shouted over the roar of rain. "There is an old line shack about a mile north. We need to unhitch the horse and ride for shelter before this gets worse." Lightning cracked across the sky, and thunder followed immediately. The storm was directly overhead. Zachary worked quickly to free the horse, then lifted Diana onto its back and swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and despite the cold rain, Diana felt warmth everywhere he touched her. The line shack was barely more than a one-room cabin, weathered and drafty but dry. Zachary got Diana inside, then tended to the horse, putting it in a lean-to shelter attached to the cabin. When he came back in, they were both shivering and soaked to the skin. "There is old wood in the corner," Zachary said, his teeth chattering. "I can get a fire going. You should try to get out of that wet dress. There might be an old blanket in the chest." He turned his back while Diana rummaged through a battered chest, finding a moth-eaten but serviceable blanket. She was wearing a chemise and petticoat under her dress, and while they were damp, they were not as soaked as the outer layer. She wrapped the blanket around herself, then told Zachary he could turn around. He had gotten a fire started in the small stone fireplace, and the flames were already taking the edge off the cold. But he was still dripping, his shirt plastered to his body in a way that made Diana very aware of the muscled planes of his chest and shoulders. "You should get out of your wet things, too," she said. "You will catch your death." Zachary hesitated, then pulled off his shirt, wringing it out and hanging it near the fire. He kept his undershirt on, which was only slightly less revealing, and Diana found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away, heat flooding her face. "I am sorry about this," Zachary said, sitting down near the fire, but keeping a respectful distance from Diana. "I should have watched the weather more carefully." "It is not your fault," Diana said. "These spring storms come up quickly." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, listening to the rain pound on the roof and the fire crackle. Then Zachary spoke, his voice low and serious. Diana, there is something I need to tell you. I have been putting it off because I was not sure how you would react, but being here, alone with you, I cannot keep pretending anymore. Diana's heart raced. What is it? I am falling in love with you, Zachary said simply, turning to look at her with those river-colored eyes. Actually, that is not quite true. I have already fallen. I am in love with you, Diana Vaughn. I love your kindness and your stubbornness and the way you cannot walk past someone in need without helping. I love how you argue with me about fair prices and how you light up when you talk about a particularly challenging mending job. I love the little crinkle you get between your eyebrows when you are concentrating and the way you smile at children. I have loved you for weeks now, and it is driving me half mad. Diana could not breathe. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Zachary was looking at her now, like she was precious and necessary and desired all at once. I do not expect you to say it back, Zachary continued. I know it is too soon, but I needed you to know. Because if you do not feel the same way, if you can never feel the same way, I need to start protecting my heart now before it gets any worse. Zachary, Diana whispered, and then she was moving, closing the distance between them without thinking. The blanket fell from her shoulders as she reached for him, and then his hands were in her hair, pulling her close, and they were kissing with a desperate hunger that had been building for weeks. He tasted like rain and coffee, and something indefinably right. His hands were gentle despite the intensity of the kiss, cradling her face like she was made of glass. Diana had never been kissed before, but instinct guided her, and when Zachary groaned against her mouth, she felt a surge of feminine power that made her bold. I love you too, she gasped when they finally broke apart. I think I have loved you since you showed up at my door and arranged everything so I could keep helping people. I have been so alone for so long, and you make me feel like I do not have to carry everything by myself anymore. Zachary pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes searching her face. You are sure? Diana, I am just a foreman. I do not own land or have significant savings. I make decent wages, but I cannot give you a grand life. I do not want a grand life, Diana said. I want a good life with a good man. I want partnership and love and someone who understands why I do what I do. That is you, Zachary. That is everything I want. He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and full of promise. They stayed in the line shack for hours, talking and kissing and planning a future together while the storm raged outside. Zachary told her he had been saving money for years, hoping to eventually buy a small ranch of his own. Diana told him about her dream of opening a proper seamstress shop where she could offer training to young women who needed skills to support themselves. We could do both, Zachary said. If we combine our resources and keep working hard, maybe in a few years. I like the sound of that, Diana said. We, our, us. I like having someone to plan with. By the time the storm passed and they rode back to town, it was late evening. Zachary left her at her door with a chaste kiss on the forehead, mindful of propriety despite what had passed between them, but his eyes held promises of a future that made Diana's heart race. The next morning, half of Walla Walla knew that Diana Vaughn and Zachary Oakes had been caught in the storm together. Mrs. Whitmore from the hotel, a notorious gossip, stopped by Diana's house before breakfast, ostensibly to ask about mending, but really to fish for scandalous details. We took shelter in a line shack, Diana said calmly, not looking up from the shirt she was mending. Mr. Oakes was a perfect gentleman. We waited for the storm to pass, then he brought me home. If you are concerned about propriety, Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps you should consider that gossiping is far less proper than taking shelter from dangerous weather. Mrs. Whitmore left in a huff, but the incident made Diana realize that she and Zachary needed to make their intentions clear. When he arrived on Tuesday to take her to the ranch, she broached the subject. People are talking, she said. About the storm, about us. Let them talk, Zachary said. But if it bothers you, we can make an announcement. I plan to wait a few more weeks before asking properly. But Diana, will you marry me? I do not have a ring yet, but I will get you one. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours. Diana's eyes filled with tears. Yes, yes, Zachary, I will marry you. They married 6 weeks later, in early August, in the small Presbyterian church on Main Street. Half the town came, including many of the people Diana had helped over the years. The Petersons brought wildflowers from their newly replanted homestead. Mr. Chen gave them a beautiful silk fan he had sent for from San Francisco. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Henderson's sister, cried through the entire ceremony. Mr. Henderson gave Diana away and hosted the reception at the ranch, where tables groaned under the weight of food, and the ranch hands serenaded the new couple with surprisingly good harmony. Diana wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Zachary wore a new suit, the first Diana had ever seen him in, and he could not stop staring at his wife like he could not quite believe his fortune. They spent their wedding night in a small house on the Henderson property that Mr. Henderson had offered them rent-free as a wedding present. It was modest but charming, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and a porch that faced the sunset. Diana had worried about the physical aspects of marriage, having no mother to guide her, but Zachary was patient and gentle, and the passion between them made everything feel natural and right. In the morning, Diana woke wrapped in her husband's arms, feeling safer and more content than she had in years. Zachary kissed her temple and murmured, "Good morning, Mrs. Oakes." "I like the sound of that," Diana said, snuggling closer. Their life together quickly found a rhythm. Diana continued her mending work for the ranch and took on other clients as well. Zachary was often up before dawn, handling the countless tasks that came with running a large cattle operation. But they always had breakfast together, and unless weather or ranch business interfered, they had supper together too. The small house became a home. Diana hung curtains she had sewn, and Zachary built her a proper sewing table with good light from the window. They filled the parlor with books purchased from a traveling salesman, and in the evenings they took turns reading aloud to each other. But the people in need did not stop coming. If anything, word of Diana's marriage to the double-bar foreman brought more requests for help. Now she had the ranch resources behind her, but she also had to be more strategic. She and Zachary sat down one evening in late September and created what they called the helping plan. "We set aside $10 a month from our combined income specifically for helping others," Zachary suggested. "No more, no less. That way we are consistent and we do not overextend. When someone comes asking for help, you assess what they need, and we figure out together how to help within our means." "What if $10 is not enough in a particular month?" Diana asked. "Then we get creative. We offer work instead of money when we can. We connect people with others who can help. We teach skills instead of just solving immediate problems. You have been helping people survive, Diana, but what if we help them thrive?" It was brilliant, and it worked. When young Mary Sullivan came asking for help because her father's carpentry business was failing, Diana and Zachary did not just give her money. Zachary talked to Mr. Henderson and other ranchers, drumming up carpentry work. Diana taught Mary to sew so she could take on piecework to supplement the family income. Within 2 months, the Sullivans were back on their feet. When a family of Swedish immigrants arrived in town with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a land grant north of Walla Walla, Zachary arranged for them to work at the double bar for the summer, learning American ranching methods and earning money. Diana outfitted them with mended clothes and taught the wife English in the evenings. By fall, they were ready to start their homestead with skills, supplies, and savings. Word spread that the Oakes family did not just offer handouts, but real help that made a lasting difference. Diana felt like she was finally doing what she had always wanted to do, but sustainably, with a partner who understood and supported her mission. In December, Diana realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary on Christmas morning, and he swept her up in his arms and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. They both wanted children desperately, and the news felt like the perfect capstone to their first year together. Boy or girl? Zachary asked, his hand spread protectively over her still flat stomach. I do not know, Diana said, but I hope they have your eyes. I hope they have your heart, Zachary replied. The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Diana continued her work through the winter and spring, only slowing down in the final month when moving became difficult. Zachary fretted over her constantly, insisting she rest more and do less. Diana found his worry endearing even when it was annoying. Their son was born on a beautiful June morning in 1883, with Mrs. Henderson attending as midwife. He was healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were already showing hints of his father's blue-green. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's father. Diana had never known love like this. She had loved her parents, loved Zachary, but the fierce protective tenderness she felt holding her son was entirely new. Zachary was equally besotted, spending every spare moment with his wife and child, singing to Samuel in a surprisingly good baritone and pacing the floor at night when the baby was fussy. But even with a newborn, the requests for help continued. Diana tried to be selective, tried to stick to their plan, but it was hard. A young woman named Grace appeared at their door one August morning, bearing bruises and terror in her eyes. Her husband beat her, she said, and she needed a place to stay while she figured out what to do. Diana brought her in without hesitation. Zachary took one look at Grace's injuries and went into town to have a very direct conversation with the husband. Whatever he said worked, because the man left town 2 days later, and Diana heard through the grapevine that he had gone to California. Diana helped Grace file for divorce, which was scandalous but necessary, and found her work at the hotel. Within a year, Grace had remarried to a gentle widower with 2 children, and she sent Diana a letter saying she had never been happier. The years rolled on, marked by seasons of hard work, growing love, and expanding family. Diana and Zachary had 3 more children, a daughter named Rose in 1885, another son named James in 1887, and a surprise daughter named Lily in 1890. The small house became cramped, so Zachary and some of the ranch hands built an addition, expanding it into a comfortable 6-room home. In 1886, Mr. Henderson made Zachary a partner in the Double Bar Ranch, acknowledging that the operation had become significantly more profitable under his management. The partnership came with a percentage of the profits, which meant real financial security for the first time in both Diana and Zachary's lives. With their improved circumstances, they were able to help even more people. Diana opened a small sewing school in town, offering free lessons to young women who needed skills to support themselves. Zachary created a program at the ranch where struggling homesteaders could learn modern ranching techniques during the winter months when work was slower. They became known throughout the Walla Walla Valley as people who helped others help themselves. Diana's sewing school trained dozens of young women, many of whom went on to open their own businesses or secure good positions. Zachary's ranching program helped countless families succeed on their land grants instead of failing and giving up. But it was not always easy. In 1889, a harsh winter killed off a significant portion of the Double Bar's herd. Money was tight, and they had to drastically reduce their helping fund. Diana struggled with having to turn people away or offer less help than she wanted to give. Zachary worked brutal hours trying to rebuild the herd and keep the ranch profitable. One night in February, Diana found him in the barn at midnight, checking on a sick cow. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, and a set to his shoulders that spoke of deep worry. "Come to bed," Diana said gently. "You cannot help anyone if you work yourself to death." "We are behind on our notes to the bank," Zachary said. "If we have another bad year, we could lose everything." "And then what happens to all the people who depend on us?" Diana took his face in her hands. "We will figure it out like we always do. Together. But right now, you need rest." They did figure it out. Spring came early that year. The grasses grew thick, and the remaining herd thrived. By fall, they had not only recovered, but exceeded their previous numbers. The crisis passed, but it reminded them both that their ability to help others was always contingent on maintaining their own stability. As the children grew, Diana and Zachary made sure to instill in them the values they lived by. Samuel, serious and thoughtful like his father, took naturally to ranching and often worked alongside Zachary. Rose, bright and creative like her mother, showed talent with needle and thread and helped in the sewing school as soon as she was old enough. James was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into minor trouble, but with a good heart. Little Lily, the baby, had inherited her mother's inability to see someone in need without helping and her father's quiet determination. In 1892, when Diana was 35 and Zachary was 40, they achieved a long-held dream. They purchased a small ranch of their own, just 300 acres adjacent to the double bar. It was not large, but it was theirs. Zachary remained a partner in the double bar, but he also began building their own herd. Diana converted one of the outbuildings into a proper sewing workshop, expanding her school and taking on more advanced projects. The children were growing into capable young people. Samuel, now 9, was already talking about expanding the family ranch someday. Rose, 7, had sewn her first complete dress with minimal help. James, 5, had declared he wanted to be a sheriff so he could protect people. Lily, 2, followed her mother everywhere on chubby toddler legs, trying to help with everything. One evening in late summer, Diana and Zachary sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Zachary reached over and took Diana's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "When I came to your door asking about mending." "Of course," Diana said. "I was nearly broke, terrified about the future, but still trying to help everyone who asked. I must have seemed like such a foolish idealist." "You seemed like the bravest person I had ever met," Zachary corrected. "And the kindest. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, though I did not admit it to myself for weeks. I saw someone who would give her last dollar to a stranger and thought, that is the kind of person I want in my life. That is the kind of person I want to become." Diana squeezed his hand. "You made it possible for me to keep being that person without destroying myself. Before you, I was drowning. After you, I could swim." "We swim together," Zachary said. "That is the deal. Always together." "Always together," Diana agreed. In 1895, when Samuel was 12, he asked if he could use part of his earnings from working the ranch to help a school friend whose family was struggling. Diana and Zachary looked at each other and smiled. Their son had learned the lessons they tried to teach, not just through words, but through watching them live those values every day. "Yes," Diana said, "but let us talk about how to help in a way that is sustainable, just like Papa and I do." They sat down with Samuel and walked him through their helping plan, how they assessed needs, offered resources and training rather than just money, and worked to create lasting solutions. Samuel listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and then helped his friend's family in a way that made a real difference. Diana felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Rose started teaching basic sewing to younger girls at the school, showing patience and skill beyond her years. James, who had befriended some of the children from the Cayuse reservation near town, learned their language and acted as a bridge between communities. Even little Lily, now 5, had started a tradition of leaving flowers on the doorsteps of people who were sad or sick. The family they had built, both their immediate children and the wider community they had helped over the years, was a testament to the power of consistent kindness backed by practical support. Diana and Zachary had not saved everyone. They had made mistakes, sometimes helped people who took advantage, sometimes missed needs they should have seen. But they had made a real difference in hundreds of lives, and they had done it together. In 1898, Mr. Henderson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. He left his share of the Double Bar Ranch to Zachary, making him the majority owner. It was both a blessing and a heavy responsibility. Zachary struggled with the weight of it, but Diana reminded him that he had been running the ranch effectively for years. The only thing that had changed was the name on the deed. With full ownership came the ability to make bigger decisions. Zachary implemented a profit-sharing program for the ranch hands, ensuring that the men who did the hard work shared in the success they created. He set aside land for ranch hands to homestead if they wanted to start their own places, offering mentorship and support. The Double Bar became known as the best ranch in the territory to work for, and they never lacked for skilled, loyal employees. Diana expanded her sewing school into a full training program that included basic literacy, numeracy, and business skills alongside the practical craft skills. Young women who graduated from her program were equipped not just to sew, but to run their own businesses or manage household accounts competently. Several of her former students had opened successful shops throughout the territory, and they often wrote to thank her for changing their lives. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Diana and Zachary took stock of their lives. They were 43 and 51 respectively, with 4 healthy, capable children, a successful ranch, and a legacy of helping others that touched countless lives. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them. "We did it," Diana said one night as they lay in bed, Zachary's arm around her shoulders. "Everything we dreamed about that day in the line shack during the storm. We made it real." "We did," Zachary agreed. "And we are not done yet. Samuel wants to expand into horse breeding. Rose wants to open a dress shop in town. James is talking about going to college. Lily wants to be a doctor, though she is only 10 and will probably change her mind a dozen times before she is grown. We have grandchildren to look forward to, new people to help, new dreams to chase." "Together," Diana said. "Always together," Zachary confirmed, kissing the top of her head. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, changing seasons, and the bittersweet process of watching children grow up and forge their own paths. Samuel married at 21 to a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they settled on land adjacent to the family ranch, expanding the operation. Rose opened her dress shop in Walla Walla at 19 and quickly became known as the finest dressmaker in the territory. James went to the University of Washington and returned with a law degree, opening a practice that focused on helping homesteaders navigate the complex legal system. Lily, true to her childhood dream, attended medical school in Portland and became one of the first female doctors in Eastern Washington. Diana and Zachary became grandparents in 1904 when Samuel and Catherine had a son they named Zachary, after his grandfather. More grandchildren followed. Rose had 3 daughters, James had twin boys, and Lily eventually had a daughter after she married another doctor. The ranch house was always full of children's laughter, and Diana joked that she had never been happier or more exhausted. They continued their helping work into their later years, though they shifted more toward mentoring and teaching others to help, rather than doing everything themselves. Diana trained several younger women to run the sewing school, ensuring it would continue after she could no longer manage it. Zachary brought Samuel fully into the ranch management, teaching him not just the business aspects, but the philosophy of fair treatment and community support that had always guided their decisions. In 1910, the town of Walla Walla held a celebration honoring Diana and Zachary for their 30 years of service to the community. Diana, now 53, was embarrassed by the attention, but Zachary convinced her to attend. They stood in the town hall while speaker after speaker recounted how the Oakes family had helped them or someone they loved. The Peterson children, now grown with families of their own, spoke about how Diana's help had saved their family from starvation. Mr. Chen's grandson, now a successful merchant, credited Diana with helping his family stay in Walla Walla when anti-Chinese sentiment might have driven them away. Grace, the woman who had fled her abusive husband, spoke about how Diana and Zachary had helped her build a new life. By the time the evening was over, both Diana and Zachary had tears streaming down their faces. They had not done this work for recognition, but it was overwhelming to see the tangible results of 3 decades of consistent kindness and practical help. I wish I could go back and tell that terrified young woman in the empty house that everything would be okay, Diana said to Zachary as they drove home in the automobile Samuel had purchased for them the previous year. That she would not have to choose between helping others and surviving, that she would find a partner who would make all her impossible dreams possible. She would not have believed you, Zachary said, just like I would not have believed anyone who told me I would fall in love with a stubborn seamstress who gave away everything she had and build a life more wonderful than anything I imagined. But here we are. Here we are, Diana agreed. They continued working for several more years, gradually handing over more responsibilities to their children, but remaining active in the ranch and the community. Diana still mended clothes in the evenings, her eyes not as sharp as they once were, but her stitches still precise. Zachary still rode out to check the cattle, though he moved slower and needed help mounting his horse some days. In the spring of 1915, Zachary was thrown from a horse and broke his hip. The injury laid him up for months, and while he eventually healed, he never regained his full mobility. He hated being limited, hated depending on others, but Diana nursed him with patient love. You spent 33 years making sure I had the help I needed to give, she told him one day when he was particularly frustrated. Now you let me take care of you for a change. That is different, Zachary grumbled. You are helping other people. I am just old and broken. You are my husband, and I love you, and taking care of you is not a burden, Diana said firmly. Besides, you are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference. Zachary softened and reached for her hand. How did I get so lucky? You showed up at my door and saw someone worth helping, Diana said. And then you spent 3 decades proving every day that you meant it. That is not luck, Zachary. That is choice. You chose me. You chose us. You chose this life. And I chose it right back. They had 23 grandchildren by 1920, with more on the way. The ranch had expanded to over 2,000 acres, making it one of the most successful operations in the region. Diana's sewing school had trained over 300 women over the years. Their children were all thriving in their chosen paths, raising families and contributing to their communities in meaningful ways. On a warm evening in August 1922, Diana and Zachary sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. They were 65 and 73, their hair silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life fully lived. Zachary's mobility was limited, and Diana's hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they still held hands as they watched the sky turn colors. Do you remember what you told me in the line shack? Diana asked, when the storm was raging outside. I told you I loved you, Zachary said. I told you I had already fallen, and there was no going back. Do you still feel that way? Diana asked. After 40 years of marriage, after all the struggles and challenges, after becoming old together, Zachary turned to look at her, and his river-colored eyes held the same intensity they had 4 decades ago. I love you more now than I did then, and I did not think that was possible. Every day with you has been a gift, Diana. Every single day. Even the hard ones, Diana asked. Especially the hard ones, Zachary said. Because we faced them together and came through stronger. That is what partnership means. Not just sharing the good times, but carrying each other through the darkness until we find light again. Diana leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They had built a good life, a meaningful life, a life that had touched hundreds of others and created ripples that would extend far beyond their time. They had loved each other fiercely and consistently through every season and challenge, and that love had been the foundation for everything else they had built. No regrets? Zachary asked quietly. Not a single one, Diana said. Well, maybe I regret not meeting you sooner, but then again, maybe we met exactly when we were supposed to. Maybe we both needed to walk our separate paths first, so we would recognize each other when we finally found our way to the same door. That is very poetic for someone who claims she has no education, Zachary teased gently. I had the best education, Diana countered. I had life and I had you. What more could anyone need? They sat together as night fell, two people who had spent 40 years proving that kindness backed by practical support could change the world, one person at a time. Two people who had found in each other not just romantic love, but true partnership, the kind that made both of them better, stronger, more capable of living their values and achieving their dreams. The years after that evening were gentle ones. Zachary's health slowly declined, but he remained sharp mentally, spending his days on the porch, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, dispensing advice and terrible jokes in equal measure. Diana continued her work as long as her hands would allow, finally retiring from the sewing school at 68 when arthritis made it too painful to demonstrate techniques. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, surrounded by 4 children, 27 grandchildren, and 18 great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with 3 generations of Oakes family and half the town of Walla Walla in attendance. Samuel stood up to make a toast, his voice thick with emotion. My parents taught me that seeing a need and doing nothing is a choice, he said. They taught me that one person cannot fix everything, but one person can make a difference. They taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a series of actions taken consistently over time. They taught me that partnership means carrying each other, supporting each other's dreams, and building something together that neither could build alone. Everything our family has, everything we are, comes from the foundation they built through love and service. To Diana and Zachary Oakes, the best parents, the best grandparents, and the best example of what a life well lived looks like. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Diana wiped tears from her eyes while Zachary squeezed her hand. They had not set out to be examples or to build a legacy. They had simply loved each other and tried to help where they could. But somehow that had been enough. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1935 at the age of 86. He simply did not wake up one morning, gone in the gentle way Diana had prayed for, without pain or fear. She held his hand and wept, not just for her loss, but for the end of a partnership that had defined her adult life. They had been together for 53 years, and she did not know how to be Diana without her Zachary, but she learned the way she had learned everything else in her life through determination and the support of people who loved her. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. She moved into Rose's house in town, where she could be closer to the center of activity and continue visiting with the endless stream of people whose lives she had touched over the decades. Diana lived another 7 years after Zachary's death, years filled with great-grandchildren and quiet contentment. She spent her days reading, visiting with friends, and telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Her favorite stories were always about Zachary, about the cowboy who had shown up at her door and changed everything, about the man who had made sure she always had help to give. She passed away in her sleep in 1942 at the age of 85, with Rose holding one hand and Samuel holding the other. Her last words were, "Tell your father I am on my way. He has been waiting long enough." They buried her next to Zachary in the cemetery, on the hill overlooking the Double Bar Ranch. The whole town came to the funeral, along with people from all over the state, people whose lives Diana and Zachary had touched over their 50 years of service. The preacher spoke about love and service and legacy, but the most powerful testimony came from the sheer number of people who showed up to honor a woman who had never turned away anyone who asked for help, and the man who had made sure she never had to. The Oakes family continued the traditions Diana and Zachary had started. The ranch remained in family hands, run with the same principles of fair treatment and community support. The sewing school continued, eventually expanding into a full vocational training center. The Helping Fund became a formal foundation that provided assistance throughout the Walla Walla Valley and beyond. And every generation of Oak's children grew up hearing the story of how their great grandmother had given away everything she had, and their great grandfather had loved her so much he spent his life making sure she could continue being that kind of person. On the headstone they shared, beneath their names and dates, was a simple inscription that captured the essence of their life together. They could not turn away anyone who asked for help, so they made sure they always had help to give. Together, always together. It was a love story, yes, but more than that, it was a story about what two people could build when they combined deep love with shared values and practical action. It was about partnership in the truest sense, about making each other's impossible dreams possible through commitment and creativity and consistent effort. It was about leaving the world better than they found it. One mended shirt, one helping hand, one act of kindness at a time. And in the end, it was about two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Diana, who could not turn away anyone in need, and Zachary, who made sure she always had help to give. Two incomplete people who became whole together, who built a life of meaning and purpose and left a legacy that extended far beyond their years. The sun still sets over the blue mountains, just as it did when Diana and Zachary sat on their porch, watching the sky paint itself in gold and crimson. The Walla Walla Valley still fills with wheat that turns the hills green in spring and gold in summer. And somewhere in that landscape, in the genes and values and stories of the descendants they left behind, Diana and Zachary Oakes live on, proof that love combined with action can change not just two lives, but hundreds, rippling outward in ways that never truly end.